Hi, we are going to try this again. All right, just waiting for some of you guys to join. Okay. Okay. Let's try this again. All right. So we're gonna try to make this work again. Let's see. Fingers crossed. All right. Fingers crossed, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Hi, Vicky. Hi, Sanju Baba. Hi, I am Meet. Deep Ramgardia, Sahil Mataru, M. Kumar Malhotra. Yes, Veer Karan, Kisan Ekta Zindabad, Harman Brar. Yes, fingers crossed. Um, Prabjot 78 Singh. Uh, Kaise ho, DJ? Hello from Ohio. Hello, hello, Sumit Sandhu. Is this working? Yes, I am in the US. It says Claudia Webbe unable to join. Okay. Why is this happening? Let's wait. All right. Bay Area Kisan Movement. All right, we're gonna try again. Is this working? Is this working? Okay. I can see you, but wondering how. Okay. Okay, so she's on here. So I'm sending, all right, MP Web, I'm sending you a request now. Okay. Hi, MP Web, you have to accept the request in this thing. Mm. Hi, Rose. Okay, so we're sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties. Um, nervous, 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 nervous. Oh, there's no request popping up. All right. MP Web, so you try sending me the request. There should be a camera button down below or under my name. It should allow you to send me a request on it. Let me try this again. All right, I just sent the request again. See if you've received it. Oh my goodness, hello.
Oh boy. Hi. Can you see me?
Yes, can you see me? All right, I just sent the request again. See if you've received it.
Okay, so I think I've got, probably because I've got two, I don't know why you're popping up twice, but you're popping up twice. Okay, I can see you.
All right.
I guess we have to do it this way.
Yeah. Well, I'm very glad to have you on today. I just want you to know how much our community appreciates your voice and, you being such a strong advocate of the farmers' protest. And thank you so much for taking the time out to join me today.
That's okay. I mean, this has been such an important movement, really. I mean, the world's largest strike. We can't forget that. That's really important. This is about workers' action. This is about farmers, Indian farmers, saying that they will not stand by and allow the corporate takeover and the privatization of the agricultural sector in India. They will not allow their farms to be taken over. This is such an important stand that Indian farmers are taking. Believe me when I say that they are on the right side of history, and we will all be judged because they are on the right side of history. And their time is now, and our time to support them is now. If we ever wanted to see how democracy is being suppressed, we only have to look at the way in which Indian farmers are being treated in India right now in terms of the state-sanctioned violence. I've got, I represent a seat called Leicester East in the East Midlands in the UK, and my constituents there, people of the Indian diaspora, residents of Britain, British citizens, are horrified. They are anxious when they are seeing barbed wire, when they are seeing cannon fire, when they are seeing water cannons, rubber bullets being used not as an act of war, but on their own citizens in India. That is absolutely shocking to the core. And that is why residents of Leicester East are saying to me, we want you to raise your voices, raise our voices, because we cannot sleep. We are anxious for our family members. These are our loved ones that are protesting peacefully on the front line, and they cannot believe how Indian farmers are being treated. And I think the world has to wake up to this. We cannot allow the suppression of democracy in this way. The right to peaceful protest is a given right, and it should not be taken away in this manner. And so the Indian farmers are right to protest. They are right to march. They are right to down tools and say that, working with the agricultural unions, the trade unions, to say enough, this cannot happen. We will not allow these 3 laws that the Indian government want to impose that will lead to the corporate private takeover of agriculture in India, and therefore the takeover of their farms. This is about the future, and that's why it's so important to stand solid, stand firm, stand with Indian farmers.
Wow, that was I'm as somebody who belongs to that community, I can say that the statement you've made, like you've spoken my heart, and I will forever be grateful for you using your voice. But I really want to know, how did you first learn about the farmers' protest, and how did you make your decision to become such a vocal advocate for it?
Well, I mean, I really did begin to learn about it way back in November, because, of course, any rumble in India affects my constituency of Leicester East.
Hmm.
It has the largest, the second largest Indian diaspora outside of London in the UK. So it is huge in terms of my constituency, in terms of representation. The Indian diaspora is huge, reflecting from a wide range of cultural, religious backgrounds. And so there were rumblings about the concern in November. I think was when the first actions in India were taking place. And then again in January, it became to greater attention. And in November, I put out a message of support. I got some rumblings in terms of kickback from people that were trying to tell me to stay out of Indian business. And I'm thinking to myself, the Indian diaspora, international concerns are of universal wide concern. It's not a question of staying out of Indian business. If human rights and the right to peacefully protest, or the right to raise your voice, or the right to question the privatization of farmland is not a it wasn't a battle between two states. This was about people, citizens. This wasn't about, interfering into Indian government processes. So then in January was the mass strike, I think, which attracted something like 250 million farmers. But out of that is when we saw for ourselves the treatment that was going on the ground that residents had spoken of, and you saw, being portrayed really across various WhatsApp group. People, residents were putting it to me, showing me the evidence, showing me the information, showing me the water cannon fire, the rubber bullets, and then to hear about that women on the front line were actually being arrested and imprisoned without bail just because they stood in support of the farmers' protest. And obviously, one woman signifies that. No deep card signifies that. She, 24-year-old laborer, union activist, very articulately sharing what the Indian farmers' protest is about, and then ending up in a Delhi police station, given no bail, and then the reports of sexism, of rape, of harassment of her. The treatment of her for somebody that hasn't even been charged, haven't even been given bail, hasn't even been given their rights. I thought that was appalling. I thought that was appalling simply because women only make up 20% of farmers, as I understand it, in India. Yet, so they face discrimination themselves within this industry. They are working on the front line as laborers, but in terms of the ownership and the real control of farming, they only really make up 20%. Yet, despite that inequality, they were coming to the front line and standing solidly with farmers and standing solidly with Indian farmers. And they were raising their voice and they were on the front line. And yet, it seemed like the state violence was targeting these vulnerable women, the most vulnerable. They were targeting women and they were imprisoning them and they were treating them appallingly. And I think that really got to me. And then in Leicester, our Sikh Gurdwara on East Park Road, they organised a rally in support. We're in Leicester. We are faced with COVID issues, and we're in a national lockdown right now. And in Leicester, we have been in a significant lockdown in terms of restrictions. So they organised what they termed was a car rally and a tractor rally. So we're fortunate in Leicester to be able to acquire some tractors, and as a symbol of support, they organised a car rally around the streets of Leicester as a symbol of support. And I think that in itself was important to do, because it was saying that the Indian diaspora is important. It was saying that Indians abroad were important and are watching, and that this is something that affects us here in Britain. And just because we are in Britain or wherever we are in the world as Indians, they were saying what is happening in India on the ground with Indian farmers matters. And I think that was such an important sign of solidarity, and what I also witnessed was a lack of international attention, a lack of media attention, a lack of focus. I was seeing the largest strike action anywhere in the world being ignored by the mainstream media, by the mainstream international media, being ignored by the international politicians of their day. And why? Why is this being ignored? These barbed wires, these cannon fire, these rubber bullets, the treatment of largely older people. You know, when you look at those images, we were talking about older Indian farmers being treated appallingly by the police, state sanctioned, and it just didn't sit or feel right, and it therefore required me to, I believe, raise my voice in the way that I saw that I could, and then of course everything thereafter is history, in the
Yeah.
sense that it took, I think, women internationally in the shape of singers like Rihanna, um, people like Greta Thunberg, as a climate activist, and others, Mina Harris, the daughter of the Vice President of America. They raised their voice in the absence of any political noise coming from governments across the world. And in the absence of that, and Rihanna's statement was, why isn't anybody talking about this, was so apt. And of course, I didn't see that as she was speaking to me, because obviously I'd raised my voice before then. I
Mm.
saw that as she was saying that the international media is ignoring this, that basically the governments internationally were ignoring this, and that as though it didn't matter. And I didn't, in the same way that we witnessed in America what happened to George Floyd. Everybody's aware of what happened to George Floyd, that you had uniformed police officers on the streets, um, basically killed George Floyd in whilst they were wearing police uniforms. They were meant to be there to protect citizens. They killed him. They put their knee on his neck and they killed him. There was international condemnation, and that included from India as well. And in the same way that that is a human rights abuse, it's the same that and of international concern, that is the same as in America, as in India, that what we are witnessing is an abuse of human rights, is an abuse of the right to freely protest. When we witness what happened to the Black Lives Matter protesters in America, where the police were treating those protesters with water cannons and rubber bullets. We witnessed that ourselves. We, as in the international community, condemn that as well. And it's the same thing, wherever these international abuses occur around the world, we have a duty to speak up. Now, when I spoke up, which was, obviously before Rihanna had spoken up, I faced a barrage of abuse. I mean, I think that as a politician, as a member of parliament, I guess I'm used to some abuse, and I guess I'm used to expecting some oppositional abuse based on political grounds. What I got from showing my support to the Indian farmers back in January and onwards and so on, I got terrible online social media abuse. I got death threats. I got sexism. I got misogyny. I got hate. I got anti-black racism. I got it all, and I felt, wow, this is terrible. And it just came as though it was machine orchestrated bots. And I thought this was unprecedented. I've never experienced anything like that, despite having grown up in a city like Leicester at a time when, as African, as Caribbean, as Asian people, we were not welcome. and I faced the physical abuse on the street. So I didn't think I could ever feel that again, that I could ever feel so um, bad again in the way that I've been treated. But that online onslaught was terrible. It was as bad as those physical attacks. You know, I stood with growing up with Asian Indian friends, and we took abuse on the streets. We were collectively saw ourselves as black because of the abuse, the name calling that we got growing up in Leicester. And I'm pleased that Leicester is such a grown up city now, that it's so diverse, it's so welcoming, it's so engaged. But I remember those days growing up with my Indian friends and how we were treated. And yet the online abuse that I got for standing up with farmers and supporting their protests was as bad. And yet it wasn't physical. That, you know, I was safe, if you like, in the comfort of an online internet sphere, and I had the protection of being able to press the mute button, the silence button. It didn't stop the bots keep coming, because they kept coming. It was like 10 to the dozen, but I was able to press the mute button and silence those abusers that were on my timeline. And the timeline still exists, of course. And one day I'll go and read them all. But just the ones that popped up were so bad, so horrific. It was incredibly terrible. And so by the time Rihanna said what she said, I was therefore not surprised at the abuse that she then got, that Mina Harris then got, that that Greta Thunberg got, and then on to top it all, for the police and the state to arrest the young climate activists, to arrest her for merely retweeting what we commonly would understand to be a campaign toolkit that Greta Thunberg had tweeted out. To arrest her for that, you know that suppression and is gone off the scale.
Yeah.
And that state sanctioned you know attacks in this way on a young I think she's 22, is she 22-year-old, in this way is just this is somebody who protests for clean air, clean water, and and for climate change, and yet she found herself in a Delhi, police cell. Unthinkable, unthinkable.
Yeah. You're right. Like the harassment that anyone who has spoken out is insane, especially yours. And we all noticed that, and we all tried to like organize to help you out as much as possible. But like because I feel like they're computerized bots, like we could never just keep up. But your harassment, I feel like was state organized because you also got a direct letter by the Indian High Commission tweeted at you. And that was so out of norm for a government to do because like the Indian High Commission in Britain represents the Indian government and like I've never seen any type of High Commission address things like that via Twitter. Um, I, but you still were undeterred. Like it was like an intimidation tactic used to silence you, but it didn't work. And I mean, you're as vocal still as you were in the beginning, as are everybody else. So why do you think that they are trying to intimidate, and why is it not working?
Well, I mean, you're right in that it was unprecedented, unusual, very strange way for the Indian High Commission in the UK to communicate with a member of Parliament. The Indian High Commission in the UK is the voice of the Indian government, and for them to communicate with me on social media, that is against all protocols, very unusual. And for them to not even understand, and I'm pretty much sure that they did understand, that when they did that on social media, they knew what they were doing, and they knew that it would result in more attacks, because I just experienced a clear onslaught online attack. So they knew that as polite as their communique was, they knew that it would result in further attacks, and that's exactly what happened. And of course, what was interesting is in that communique, I think there was information that not even the Indian citizens in India had even had from their own government, in the sense that they might have assumed what the Indian government thought, but what the Indian High Commission in their communique actually confirmed what the Indian government thought about, in particular, international involvement, as they put it, in the affairs. And really, that is no way to communicate even to even to the citizens of India. And I think that it showed an exposure, I think, of the Indian government, where they themselves are not communicating, being transparent and open with their own citizens. And I think that's what that also highlighted in that sense. And to give that, the way that they did that in terms of the social media, to try to silence me, essentially. There was an act of trying to silence me, in the sense that they'll put it out there, they'll make it absolutely clear where the Indian government stands, but they'll make sure that those who are engaged in hate have a continued target, and that target for them was me, and anybody else that dared to even raise their voice, they were going to simply silence with actually polite untruths, because it's not true. Many of the things that they put into that communique, not true. The notion that they they are meeting, or they've met and agreed with Indian farmers, not true. Indian farmers would not be on the front line protesting if everything was okay. Clearly, everything is not okay, and therefore it's not. There's a lot of that in the communication that was not true, and so I pointed that back out in a response, how and made clear that if the actions really were to silence me, it wasn't going to silence me. If the actions are to silence women, it's not going to silence women. If the actions are to stop Indian farmers from protesting, well, clearly that's not going to stop Indian farmers from protesting. And I think that I have to say that as much as abuse that I get online, and as much as I get the lack of protection that I get from social media companies, because it's a clear demarcation between the way in which social media companies can act on the behest of the Indian government. When the Indian government say close down the internet, those social media companies do that, and yet it will watch all the online abuse that people like me and others get and do absolutely nothing. And the police that are watching all of this doing nothing. And so the abuse just continues. So there's a lot of work to do with social media to stop the abuse that is going on, not just of me, of course, of everybody that I've seen who have raised their voice against the poor treatment of the Indian farmers at the hands of the state. Every time anybody's raised their voice, they have taken abuse after abuse, and I've seen all of that. And yet there's not been any action from the social media companies. But as much as that is happening, because as I said earlier, we have the protection of a mute button.
Yes.
So we can mute, we can block. Well, actually I gave up blocking because it was just so many. So you just mute it. You just mute that. You have the protection of a mute button, but the people on the ground who are peacefully protesting, no protections. We've seen no protections. They are faced with barbed wire, trenches, as though we're in a state of war against an enemy. The citizens of India are being treated like enemies. And, when you see that barbed wire, the last time you saw that type of barbed wire is when you had the Second World War, First World War.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about citizens of India, not enemies of the state. Citizens of India are saying, we want to talk about the three farm laws. It's a conversation, it's a negotiation. And they're saying, actually, we can see it clearly now. We want them repealed.
Yeah.
That is a conversation, not an act of war.
Yeah.
And it's unconscionable to think how Indian farmers are being treated, how women in particular on the front line are being treated. It's so appalling to see, and that's why I think when I saw the front page of the Time magazine,
Yeah.
and I saw women on that, Indian women on the front, women who were supporting the farmers' protests on the
Mhm.
front page of Time magazine with children and with their children and so on. That was such a perfect image because it depicted very clearly that women are on the front line. Women have always been on the front line. Women will always be on the front line, and they will not be silenced.
I love that. I love that. And I want to talk more about that because you being a woman, um, I mean, it's no secret. We live in a patriarchal world, right? And you are a woman, you are a woman of color, you're a woman of color in politics with a voice and a platform. And I want to know what that means for you. What does it mean to be a woman in public office? You know, the everyday battles of being female that you face. You know, I'm sure your harassment, being a woman in a public platform, I'm sure you've faced misogyny multiple times in your life and just in what you do. So talk about that because our world likes to silence powerful women.
Mm. Well, it's the problems start with, first of all, not having enough women in politics and in parliament and in decision making positions. Nothing that equates to the population at large, because we're meant to be 50%, and I think that. So it starts with the systems and the processes. I'm a member of parliament for the oldest parliament in the world. And in a sense, that is for years had been dominated by men and been dominated by white men, I guess, at the end of the day. And therefore, what I bring into Parliament, and I've only been elected just over a year, what I bring into Parliament is a dramatic and dynamic change, both in terms of gender and in terms of ethnicity. And so what I highlight is actually this is this challenges the existing norms and culture of Parliament, because in a sense this was once a place, as I highlighted in my maiden speech, this is once a place which sanctioned and engaged with colonialism, imperialism, and oppression across the world. This was where the decisions made that enslaved my ancestors. These are the people historically who benefited from the historical injustices of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism. This is the place, actually, when it comes to India, for example, that raped and pillaged India. By the time the British left, as we all know, they left India with only 4% of the of GDP compared to the 29% of GDP standing that it had in the world. So we know that the atrocities that the British committed historically are writ large, and it's change as a woman, both in terms, not just in terms of gender, therefore, but in terms of class and in terms of race, bringing that whole cultural change to the fore. So I obviously portray in my politics a very socialist um, uh, politics, and I therefore I'm concerned about the way in which the working class are treated. And writ large amongst that is the plight of women. And I see that obviously in the therefore the policies that I challenge. So right now we're dealing with in Parliament a budget that is meant to be a budget that brings us out of what is happening in terms of COVID and how it's impacted us here in the UK. And the biggest impact that COVID has had is highlighted the inequalities that exist. And
Mm-hmm.
those inequalities have really impacted women in kind of significant ways. And so, in terms of not just in terms of jobs lost, in terms of just in terms of the way in which household incomes are now affected, in the way in which people are having to suffer from things like fuel poverty, and even more so, and the way in which unemployment affects women in particular, in the way in which even down to the professions that people do, like nursing and those frontline professions, in effect that it's women that's been at the forefront of some of those
Mm-hmm.
professions that have protected us. And so it's about speaking up for those voices, but in getting into Parliament and
Mm-hmm.
getting there, the struggle has been happening over many years. So if I'm entering a system which is predominantly male, it's
Mm-hmm.
taking me much longer than the average male to get into the system in the first place. I'm
Mm-hmm.
affected by being female. I'm affected by being coming from the working class, and I'm affected by being black. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it has taken a considerable length of time as an activist to get into a position of decision making in Parliament. And so, and it's not that I've not been a political activist for a long time. I have. I've been a member of I've been a party activist for a long time. I've been doing politics for what feels like a very long time, and I have been active in this sphere for a very long time. But because I'm a woman, then it means that I won't be recognised as readily for positions, and it cuts across the grain. And I just say that, when you think about how society operates in the UK, we think about three power bases, really. And that is the power of the media, the mainstream media, the
Mm-hmm.
power in terms of political power,
Mm-hmm.
and the power in terms of corporate power. And in all three spheres of those three power bases, women are underrepresented. So women are not on the decision-making boards of the media. So the way in which women are portrayed is being defined by a particular mindset and a particular construct. 83% of the media outlets in the UK are owned by three people, and probably at a push four people, four billionaires. So in a sense, it is not diverse, and it is not democratized media. It is not media that is going to reflect a more balanced frame, and therefore women will always be reflected against, in a negative way, against that. And
Mm-hmm.
where we do get women into those boards, media decision making boards, it is rare,
Mm-hmm.
and it is on someone else's terms. And that is the problem with the media. Number one, the corporate sector, again, there's just simply not, in terms of big business and in terms of the corporate sector, we are simply as women really not really reflected, not, and then not least as as Asian, as African, as Caribbean women, we are hardly anywhere to be seen on those board tables. And then, of course, as I said, in politics, we're pushing through, but nowhere still near enough to our actual numbers in society. And therefore, decisions, I'm a lawmaker in Parliament. We are making laws that affect people and communities. And the decisions we make, the priorities we choose, affect the way that people are treated and receive a service and or are able to have a life or not. And women are disproportionately affected by the lack of representation in terms of decision making.
Yeah.
And so the decisions that are made are often in the interest of men than they are in the interest of women. And that is why we see quite a lot of the inequalities that we are seeing today. So it's been one of trying to push through all of that. As a black woman, of course, I along the way, yes, I faced sexism. Along the way, yes, I've faced anti-black racism. But I've pushed through. I've pushed through, and I'll continue to try to push through. But I don't underestimate the way in which the system will continue to try to work against me, and against people that look and sound like me. That having a socialist, having a woman, having a black person in parliament is a rare thing in British politics, and so it is not what people want to see. So there will always be systems that will try to push back against me, to say that I am not worthy, to try to say that I am not worthy, to try to say that I do not belong. And I've had that all the way through, and you can see it sometimes emerge on social media, all of the tropes that are applied to women, that are applied to black people, are often used in arguments against me, as though I am not worthy and I do not belong. But fortunately, I grew up in Leicester, a diverse city. And I grew up, having to combat racism at its heart, having to combat the brutal effect of the 70s. In Britain and the UK, the 70s were particularly bad. In 1972, when Idi Amin, kicked out Ugandan Asians, they came in large parts to the UK and to Leicester. And so they were met with, racism in the same way that people of the Caribbean who came in the 60s were met. But we united in the 70s because we had this an onslaught of brutal racism. And that's why I pay tribute to, there's a group of Asian women strikers in a place called the Imperial Typewriters Factory in Leicester. And that was in the mid-1970s. They were brave enough as women, Asian women, as workers. They were brave enough to come on strike because they noticed that their pay was much less than their equivalent white counterpart. And they decided as women that they were going to raise their voices against these corporate owners of the Imperial Typewriters Factory. And they did so even against the advice of union officials who said no. And so they came out by themselves and they raised their voice in the 70s. And when you're young, when you're a child growing up, witnessing the courageous efforts of Asian women strikers who are going to come out on strike, knowing that they're not even supported by their union.
Yeah.
They're going to strike anyway because what they witnessed was wrong, what they saw was wrong, that they were doing the same job as their white counterpart, yet they were getting much less than their counterpart. And they exposed that inequality. And because they exposed that inequality, we now have stronger race relation laws in the UK because they sacrificed themselves. They came out. And, you know, that's why I pay tribute to them all of the time. And it was their actions that then led to a catalogue of strike actions across the UK where Asian women were at the forefront, but now supported by their unions. And the 70s was one of addressing what we call the deindustrialization, the undermining of the manufacturing base in the UK by successive conservative governments at that time. And so it was an important marker to make. And so, because I come out of that period of time and that history, it gives me the strength to kind of withstand what some of the onslaught and some of the attacks that I've had, and some of the pushback that I've had over years of trying to push through into politics and into decision making and into change and into processes of change. I'm here seeking in the UK in Parliament transformational change. That is what is needed, because we have a system and a society that is based and works in the interest of the 1%, essentially, you know, the wealthy, and that is what needs to be overturned, because there was so much abuses going on where billionaires, the corporate sector, the wealthy are getting away with so much, whilst the workers, the working class, those who are poor, the poorest, are suffering the worst. And I think that change is absolutely needed, but it requires you know, it requires that change in Parliament where laws are being made. We have to, you know, I see myself being able to influence the legislation and the laws that are being made, and I hope that that over time, some of my impact will mean something to what then happens on the ground in communities.
I mean, you definitely have an impact, because me living in America feels so supported by you, and I'm not even one of your constituents. But so I'm gonna read a lot. I'm gonna read up about the Imperial typewriter strike, because I actually didn't know much about it. So I actually jotted that down. What the last thing I want to touch upon is so 2020 has the highest number of women in British Parliament. I want to talk about like political activism and the need for women to understand that roles of power are appropriate for them as well, and to be more active in politics. You talk about it was difficult for you to enter into politics and to enter into a man's field, and to enter into a field that was predominantly white. And what advice would you give to someone like me? I'm also a woman of color. You know, I don't know for sure if I want to enter politics or not, but like if I did, what advice would you have to give me? What do you see for women in the future of politics?
Well, I think the most important thing about being in politics is being true to yourself. And I think that, you know, there are people who enter into politics and, in a sense, they are not necessarily entering to change anything.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to enter into politics, you need to be a change maker, and you need to be, therefore, quite prepared to get off the fence, and quite prepared to challenge and change and to bring about that. And, you know, the culture of Parliament can be so overwhelming. You can almost lose yourself and become that culture instead of being the activist that you once were. And if you therefore need to not lose sight of yourself. If you're going into politics, why are you there? What are you there to do? And if you're in politics and you haven't spoken up, for example, on the farmers' protests, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't anybody who says they are a socialist, a progressive, a Democrat, why wouldn't they have spoken up yet about the farmers' protests?
True.
What's holding you back?
True.
Why aren't you talking about it? And that is the test, really. That begins to be the kind of test that you then start to see in terms of politicians. What is it that is holding you back? What is it? There is nothing, there is nothing about what the farmers are doing which is illegal. There's nothing which is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We all believe in human rights.
Mm-hmm.
We all believe in democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Britain prides itself on being on being on prides itself on promoting democracy around the world. That's what it prides itself on. So
Yes.
why wouldn't you then speak up about what's going on with events like the farmers' strike? Why wouldn't you speak up about what's happening in Brazil? Even the Amazon is burning. The land is being stolen from the Aborigines, the indigenous people. Why wouldn't you speak up about that? And why wouldn't you speak up if you're in America about what happened to George Floyd? These are not party political things necessarily. These are about about self, and therefore your purpose and why you go into politics. And the biggest thing therefore is not to lose self. It's always easier to lose self within that culture which is overwhelming, because you want to be part of that culture. You want to be part of that system and that culture. And it's a very privileged culture in Parliament. But then what was your purpose in the first place? So people get into politics sometimes for the right reason, but then they lose themselves because they forget how to hold on to what's important. And then some people clearly enter politics for the wrong reason, but tell those people that elected them a different story. So they're duplicitous. But those people you usually should be able to spot from a mile off.
Yeah.
But what I would say to, therefore, as women, we have integrity. We bring something different to the table. That's, why we must enter these spheres, because we bring a difference. These power institutions that I talk about, I mean, it doesn't have to be just politics. It could be in any sphere, on the boards of corporate companies, for example, or getting into the media at the highest levels. The reason we get there as women should be because we bring a difference to the table. So we're not there to replicate what we see. We're there to change what we see. I think I'd want to evoke the words of one famous American, but I won't do because I can't remember her entire phrase. But I think it runs along the lines of, we're not there to no longer accept what we cannot change. We're there to change what we can no longer accept. It runs along those kinds of words. But I think it is about staying true to self, to not being consumed by the culture, which is often a male culture. A state culture, a culture that is not of our class, and therefore we make no difference. But if you're going into these positions of representation, decision making, then let's hope you can make a difference. Let's hope that that is your goal, and let's hope that that is what drives you, and that is your mission in whatever you do, actually. We talk about those particular spheres: politics, corporate governance, or media control. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be, in one's own communities, residential areas, states, cities, at different levels. Whatever we do, let's do it because we want to change things for the better, and we want to create a more equal society, and we want to ensure that people aren't just surviving, but they are living. They are truly living. They're not just surviving. And for too long, too many people are simply just surviving. What kind of life is that?
Yeah.
Who should be living like that in what for the UK is the sixth wealthiest country in the world, where we have food banks galore? So many women are having to queue up at food banks. So many women are part of the working poor. Why? This should not be happening in the sixth richest country in the world. Our role is therefore, if we're joining the system, let's change it.
That was powerful. Um, MP Webb, I am so grateful that you joined me today. Thank you so much for having this conversation, and thank you so much for being so vocal on the farmers issue.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's the farmers that have inspired us all. It's the farmers who, are, this is, I mean, they are on the front line. They are setting up, you know, communal food processes. They are setting up some ways in which they survive continuously on the front line. They are doing so much to inspire us all, really. And women in particular on that front line are doing so much. It is they who we owe our tribute to, as they, particularly as older farmers, and the conditions under which they are having to live that protest. That is inspirational. We should all be supporting them. We should all stay with them. We should all back them. They're on the right side of history. We should never forget that.
Absolutely. I mean, you're speaking everything that I'm feeling right now. Um, Thank you, MP Webb. I hope you, I wish, I really hope you understand how grateful we are as a community for you and for your voice.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
No problem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.